Good, man.
All right, you're listening to the Montreal Marketeers with Matt and Vince. Today we have another special guest, just like every other week, a special guest. Well, today we have Seth, the engineer, the audio engineer behind GaryVee's podcast. And Seth, we're really big fans of GaryVee. We love the content you push out. And let everyone know a bit about who you are and what you're all about.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Seth. I run Gary's audio in general. So I produce his podcast, which is published daily across all podcasting platforms, called the GaryVee Audio Experience. I also handle his Alexa skill, which is it's currently a flash briefing. So it's a little like tidbit that you would hear every morning when you wake up. Say, Alexa, what's my flash briefing? And you get like a 1 to 2 minute little thing from somewhere, some piece of content that's already been produced, just to like get you going in the morning. Along with that, outside of the VaynerMedia world, I am a huge gearhead. I'm super into cars, even though living in New York City, it's a little tough because it's really hard to have a car here. And big like fitness buff. And besides that, I'm just a cool dude.
I just actually yesterday I just test drove for the first time an electric car. I had my reservation on the Model 3, and I went to go test drive the Model S.
I've been dying to drive a Tesla. How is it?
I'm telling you, it was crazy. It was friggin' nuts. Like I just felt like it's very different than driving a gas car, just the way the pedal works and the braking system and everything. When you accelerate on that Model S, like it's even on the basic model, I won't lie, I wasn't going ludicrous or anything. I was doing that 4.2 seconds and 100 kilometers. And that was awesome.
This is the 20th time I've heard this story.
Yeah.
I was
telling everyone, like, honestly, like, it's just, I'm so excited for the Model 3 to the point where my head was spinning after saying, how do I get maybe my hands on a used Model S or to be able to afford it? Because it just, the drive was so comfortable with those shocks too, as well as like we have in Montreal, there's a lot of potholes, especially now. Ice is melting, snow is melting. You're going to see a lot of potholes. And that drive.
Same here in New York, yeah.
It's like it didn't exist. Yeah. It was like driving on a cloud. Like ridiculous. It was amazing.
Incredible.
So not I gotta.
One of my goals for 2018 is to test drive a Tesla. Easily.
Fill in that friggin' form. Lie if you have to. It doesn't matter. Then just get it done. Go for it. That's it. It's so much fun.
Fair.
Yeah. So we recently started Montreal Marketeers on episode 23. And one of the main reasons why we decided to interview you is we want to get kind of your feedback on, for anybody that wants to start a podcast, what's your main approach? Like, how did you actually get into starting a podcast from scratch?
So the first podcast, I've been doing audio for a while. I in high school, took it upon myself. I've always been super into tech, so it was sort of a natural flow to me, and super into music at the same time. Like I grew up playing trombone and playing bass guitar in bands and stuff. So eventually I just sort of floated into I should record all this and put it on a CD and make a mix. So I'd been in audio for a while. This is the first podcast I've actually really produced. But it's, I guess how I got into producing podcasts was the question.
No, but start from the beginning. That's cool. Like how'd you get into audio? How'd you become an audio engineer? That's cool.
Yeah, so I started recording my band in high school and friends' bands in high school with really, really simple mics, and it caught my attention. It was something I really enjoyed because I was able to mix my love for tech with my love for music. Yeah. Eventually I ended up going to school for it. I went and got my bachelor's in it was called studio production, which it was audio engineering with a different name, at a state school in New York. I loved doing it. I didn't love the part about being in a studio alone, producing the same album for 3 to 6 months. It just wasn't my thing. I like interacting with people. I like being around different people and different things. So after school, I sort of fell out of it, did some random things here and there. I did some live sound gigs. I did a couple little recording gigs, but nothing super permanent. Audio wasn't my full-time job for a while. Then fell into working in 3D printing. Started working for a company called Shapeways, which is like a 3D print manufacturer, doing their content and doing their social media. And that's when I sort of fell back in love with like making stuff and like content creation. So, so I was doing like videos and stuff for them. Sorry, again?
Did you go into 3D printing because of the tech aspect of it, even though you weren't necessarily doing the 3D printing or the engineering behind it? Like, was there a reason why you went into that, or?
It was I like was working a random job at I was working at Starbucks at the time, and like I saw. I originally started working for MakerBot, who was a 3D printer manufacturer. Like they make 3D printers, and I saw an opening like open up at their retail store. I was like, all right, like I like tech. Like 3D printing is super super cool right now. This was in like 2012. Like screw it. Like I'll just try it out and see what happens. Really really enjoyed it. Like loved the company, loved the people. Ended up going from retail to doing competitive intelligence for them, which was like playing with competitors' printers to see what the advantages and disadvantages were to help pitch our sales team. Got laid off in one of their rounds of layoffs, and then was like, all right, well, I really like 3D printing. Like, let me check out what's here in New York, and ended up at Shapeways doing their social media, which I had never really had experience with managing a company's social media before, but because I knew 3D printing and because I was just like, I want to learn this, they took a chance on me and they were just like, all right, like, let's see what happens. Did that for about a year and a half. And then that's when I ended up coming to Vayner. My girlfriend actually worked at Vayner before I do. So she overheard from somebody at a random coffee meeting that Gary's team was looking for an audio engineer. So I got put in touch with the team, had a couple meetings, and then said, let me take this, like, another risk, because I started here as a resident. I was like, I'm going to leave this full-time job and just, like, go into it and see what happens.
Very cool.
And now I'm here, and I'm, like, it's nice to finally find somewhere that you're just, like, feel like home. Like, if you love the people you work with, you love that everybody's super driven, and you love that, like, it's just nice to like wake up in the morning and be like, I'm excited for today. But yeah, so I came here and was like, I'm going to figure out how to produce a podcast. Gary's is a little different in that his is published every single day rather than like weekly or bi-weekly or monthly. And then a lot of it is repurposed content from keynotes or it's like mashups that I'll find a bunch of content that has a similar theme and have it flow into each other, sometimes with music behind it. Or, occasionally it is native podcasts. We'll do pod sessions, which is something that we've just started doing, a lot more, which is really great. It's like a roundtable discussion of Gary and a few influencers, in whatever spaces we're pulling from, or brown paper bags, which is something very similar to that, just with a little bit of alcohol involved. We'll repurpose stuff from other podcasts, which performs well. I mean, we do everything with all of our content in every place.
So when you look at your past job in social media and an actual audio engineer to create podcasts, did you learn a lot from the social media aspect into how to select good content? Or is it really you're given the task of do it this way and just get it done?
It's a little bit of both, yes. I mean, I definitely I was able to think of more creative ways to promote the podcast after learning the ins and outs of social media. And it definitely comes into play now when we're always promoting either a show or promoting the podcast in general, because Gary's so bullish on or so hyped up about audio. It's definitely, I'm responsible in part for promoting it and pushing it and getting it to gain traction. So it definitely benefits me there.
Okay. I'm just curious, how do you, with all that content, especially when it comes to GaryVee, but I mean any company you're working with from an audio perspective or social media perspective, how do you keep that data in a manner that's easy to find? So when you have, let's say, so many speaker notes, so many comments, how do you go back and find all that and then repurpose it later on? Because sometimes I notice some companies are pulling from a year ago, 2 years ago. If it's a really key topic that comes popular today, they'll repurpose that. So how do you go back and find that?
There's a couple ways. So a lot of people in the team, I'm able to just sort of ask and say hey, do you have any, can you help me find a point in time where Gary talks about X topic? I think it'd be really relevant right now. And there's usually somebody who will know that. There's also, and you can, if you Google it, you can find it. there's a search engine that was built that searches the caption files of like almost all of Gary's YouTube videos.
Okay.
So we can type in a word, like we can type in like Snapchat, and it'll populate all the times that he's talked about Snapchat. Not necessarily, exactly. I'll go through those to try to find like what I'm looking for.
Okay. So there's a basic tagging that's involved for each.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, there's a little bit of tagging. It's mostly if I can't find it on there, then I'll go to somebody on the team, and somebody usually has some sort of context around like a video that was made like a year and a half ago that had something to do with permission or it like all the common themes.
Okay. So if you're giving advice to someone that's looking to start a podcast, we talk about equipment and all that. Would you go the bootstrapping approach, like really bare bones on everything, or would you go really like you have to get this piece of equipment or else it's not worth it? Like, how would you actually go about recommending someone?
I think it's hard to. It depends on what level you're trying to get in at. So if you have the money to spend on really nice equipment, then and you're obviously dedicated to doing this, that's kind of the main thing. The main thing to keep in mind is like if you're going to do it, like do it. Don't just like buy the equipment and let it sit, in the corner. If you have the money to buy great equipment, I say go for it. It's definitely production quality is definitely an asset when it comes to podcasts. Like if you think about it, like while you're commuting, you don't want to listen to bad quality in your ears for an hour and a half. But that said, apps like Anchor have made it super, super easy to be able to just get started. And it's not bad quality. Like it's on your phone. iPhones nowadays are great. You can get like a lightning attachment that is a better quality microphone. Like I know Shure makes one. It depends where you're trying to start out.
Okay.
Like you really can get started for free, and you can publish to iTunes for free, which is amazing. And something that Anchor's doing that I'm still blown away by. And they're great people. They're always super nice and super helpful to the podcasting community. So that's if you're trying to get in an entry level, that's my go-to recommendation.
Okay. And yeah, go ahead.
Sorry?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say if I don't know how in depth you want to get about gear.
You can go as in depth as you want.
Yeah, you can. I mean, we have some experience with Anchor. We had started Anchor after the fact, so we got everything loaded into iTunes. We did through Squarespace. So Squarespace has an API where you can easily integrate into iTunes and so forth. And Google Play, it's easy to kind of get your podcast, your audio files on there.
Right.
The one thing I noticed with Anchor that I was really worried about is when you're starting off, you're right. It's a perfect medium to just kind of get out there and do it. But everything is housed on Anchor. There's no way for you to export and take your files, let's say on season 2, season 3, onto a bigger scale. So if you wanted to create your own website and house everything there or move to another platform, you lose everything that you've created up to date to a certain degree, unless you want to go and find a way to download them and then take those audio files and reload them. Whereas with SoundCloud, that's not the case, right? You can migrate to various other solutions. So that's what we're using right now, SoundCloud, because on the Squarespace side, it's awesome for a website standpoint to create a quick and easy website, landing pages on the go, really easy. The real task now, the challenge we find with Squarespace is the audio box is not working.
Interesting.
So the audio box, what happens if you were on our website a few months ago, you notice that when you click on the audio box for larger files, there'd be a delay about 30 seconds to a minute.
Yeah, there was like a hidden buffer that wasn't displaying. So it was like a really bad experience. Yeah.
And if you had like a 4-minute song or something, that's a different story. When you start getting into 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 50-minute podcast audio files, it was taking forever to load. And we're like, the one thing we need to do right is audio.
Yeah, for doing a podcasting website, our audio should play right away.
That's it. The video might not be the best, that's fine, but the audio, at least the audio has to be clear, concise, and easy for the person to download and play and buffer and so forth. So to the point where we've brought it down to even a medium quality sound. Not that the ear can actually tell it's at 128 versus a higher bit rate. But by doing that, it's a smaller file, so people can download it on the go, and they're not worried about data consumption and so forth. So we even thought of that a bit as well.
That's smart. That's really smart.
Yeah.
Equipment-wise, what we use most of the time when we are doing native podcasts, love the Zoom H6, which is just like a little handheld
Okay.
portable recorder. Usually running a Shure SM7 through it.
Okay.
For bigger sessions, like for live streaming stuff, we'll use like a Focusrite Scarlett. I think it's the 18i8 model. 4 inputs, and same thing. Like we'll run the Shure SM7 through it. For hosting, we use Libsyn now. Libsyn they've been awesome. It's one of the oldest distribution platforms around. But other ones that I've played a little bit with, like Pippa is a brand new one that I played with a little bit, which is super interesting. Like it's a startup, and like they give you some cool analytics, which like somehow they're able to push it a little bit beyond what like normal podcast analytics are. Because I'm sure it's like, as you guys have seen, like you don't get a ton of information unless you're just starting to see a little bit more when you go into like the iTunes side, and like the Podcast Connect, where like you can get like devices and you can go a little more granular. I'm trying to think what the other Shout Engine. We over the holidays we launched like a VaynerMedia 6 episodes, super like hacking the holidays e-commerce based podcast. And for that, I was like, all right, I got to find like the cheapest solution, just because like it's a limited run. We don't need anything extravagant. And I found Shout Engine to be a really, really cool platform too.
Okay. So where do you recommend people drive the traffic to? Is it, if you have, let's say you enjoy using Instagram and you're putting snippets of information there, video and audio and whatnot, do you want everyone to drive towards your Libsyn account or your SoundCloud or your YouTube? Like you go to your website. There's so many means now. There's so many areas you can drive people to. What do you recommend for someone who's starting out?
I say iTunes.
Okay.
Especially if you're brand new and you give them some love and you give them some traffic, there's a good chance you'll get pushed up into like the new and noteworthy section of iTunes, which will then get you even more visibility. And because it's still like something like 90% or so, I don't remember the exact statistic, but it's somewhere around there. 90% of like podcasts are listened to on iTunes or on the Apple Podcasts app. It's just the best chance to get more viewers and to get more listeners. Unless you're running, if you want to focus on your website, you want to focus on the fact that you have like a video component with it. If you're running paid ads, or if you want to drive to that medium, then that's a good choice too. Other than that, like we also we'll drive to, like for pod sessions, for example, because we also have a video aspect to that. We'll drive to YouTube just to give you, because we know that some people don't listen to the podcast or they don't want to hear it in audio. They want to see it play out. Depends on where you want to send people really, and what channel you want to grow. Like for us, especially on the podcast side, iTunes is the biggest player. We want to stay consistently within the top 100 podcasts on iTunes, because it's a good place to be.
So how do you stay there? Besides producing quality content, is there specific? You know what I mean? Like obviously your content is good. That's not the issue. But how do you actually promote people? Just a constant reminder of go on iTunes, subscribe to our podcast. Now, like how do you actually go about that? Because I know you were talking about the marketing aspect of it before. So
yeah. So by pushing from every single other social channel to that platform.
Okay.
We'll make Facebook videos that will drive, like it'll be either snippets of a podcast or an ad that's driving through to iTunes. Like, hey, did you know Gary Vaynerchuk has a podcast? And if he does like a really, really big interview with somebody, we'll push that really hard to like, go listen to this on the podcast, listen to the full version of the podcast. Same thing, like he'll promote it on Twitter a lot. And with Instagram stories and Instagram swipe up to like, are you listening to the podcast? Have you listened to the podcast? I'm sure like some of you have seen, or you guys have seen, his pushes towards it. It's all just constant reminders of, hey, like, or if it's not a reminder, it's like it's an introduction to a new audience you may have. Like if you've just gained X amount of followers on Instagram for whatever reason, like those people probably may not know about your podcast. They may have found you a different way, and they'd be interested to see that you have a podcast.
Okay.
So it's all about just making sure the attention is still on there.
Okay. So,
what would you say would be crucial elements to a successful podcast or successful audio file? And the reason I'm asking that is because we always get caught, even us when we first started. The first thing I said, Matt, we got to find a song. Got to find a good song. Got to find a good intro. And it gets you excited, right? You got to come up with a name. And you get caught up with all these
it's like the business card
Yeah,
and the logo of
yeah,
like
yeah.
the
You're like, oh my,
iTunes
the
logo,
business
yeah.
card is so much more important than the actual business what you're doing. What would you recommend if someone were to start off something like Montreal Marketeers or another, podcast revolved around, say, Gary Vee type of themes and whatnot? What would you recommend that person do to start off with?
I mean, the biggest thing to take into consideration, at least in my own head, is consistency. Like your audience needs to know when they can expect a new episode. Like whether it's, if you want to start out, if you're really ambitious and you want to do if you want to do like 2 times a week, like try to keep that cadence and have it be the same time on Tuesdays and the same time on Fridays or whatever days you choose. Obviously, if you can't sustain that, like drop it down. But always have a set time where you're promoting that there will be a new episode. Like if it's 5 a.m. on Fridays, always have it be 5 a.m. on Fridays, or at least to the best of your ability. Like try to not just do it randomly, like 5 a.m. on Friday and then like a 4 p.m. on Saturday. It helps people get into a routine.
Also help
aside from that,
on the iTunes side too? Does that help when iTunes kind of pulling from your RSS feed? It shows consistency. Does it help also there as well from a ranking standpoint or quality standpoint?
that I'm not sure. iTunes publishes very, very little on their ranking algorithm. It's been said that like I've read a couple articles that say that it's like subscriber velocity. So if you have the more new subscribers you get per day, helps boost up the rankings, but also ratings take into play and overall data. It's like a really strange ranking system that like you consistently see the top 10 podcasts just always in the top 10. But there's no real definition on like exactly how it works and how you can kind of hack that system. I'd say consistency and quality content that people want to listen to is always is helpful. Like keep it within your demographic, keep it within your target. Don't one day be talking about like the basketball and then the next day you're talking about like spaceships.
Okay.
It's like unless that is somehow related to your thing. Like if you're talking to somebody about how they market spaceships and how they market basketball, then that's a common thread. But like if it's like a basketball player and like a space musician, which is something I just completely made up off the top of my head, it's kind of hard to draw that common thread.
No, I get it. I mean, if you look at Joe Rogan as an example, he's got a common thread. Even though he goes outside those lines, one day he's interviewing a race car driver, Dana or whatnot, and then he's going to UFC fighters or comedians. But there is a commonality. It's X amount of times a week, and you'll see a switch between UFC fighter, a bit of randomness, back to comedy, back to UFC fighting.
Right, exactly.
There is a trend, like you see, and it's consistent.
So,
exactly, yeah.
When you talk about length of a podcast, and this is a discussion we've had a lot, do you see like an is there like an ideal length, or depending on the audience, like how does that work out for you? Like that on the analytics side, like how do you look at that?
For us, we see more downloads on longer form content than we do in shorter form, for sure. And like longer form being 30 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
We've once in a while we'll do short form, like 3 to 4 minutes. Just to see how it performs. The same thing. Like I have in TweetDeck, which is just like a Twitter scanner essentially. I have GaryVee podcast as a search term, so I can see what people are saying about Gary's podcast. And the general consensus is that people like longer stuff, which isn't a huge surprise. Like if you're commuting, if you have like an hour long commute or a half hour long commute, like you want to be able to listen to a whole episode and have it be like a kind of I don't want to say consistent experience, but like. If you're downloading it to your phone and you only download one episode and it was 4 minutes long, and then you're in the subway and you know the service, you're like, all right, well, I'm out of luck. Like it's the same thing as like a radio show. Like there's a reason that talk shows are an hour long or an hour and a half long. You like kind of like get into that cadence of just listening, and then you don't want to be interrupted.
Yeah, you touched on something before, by the way, and Alexa skills. How much does that play into? Because obviously podcast is a big part of it. Is the Alexa skills more of a learning experience now to see where it's going to go later? Like how much importance do you put on that specific part of your job?
A decent amount. So we have both. We publish both on just the Audio Alexa as well as the Alexa Show. It's the same content on both. It's the Audio Alexa version is just the audio from whatever's published on the Alexa Show. It's right now. We still see it as a very important place to be because it's upcoming, and we want to be at the forefront of everything upcoming like that. When I first got my Alexa, I was like, oh, I'm going to use this to check the weather once in a while. But now I wake up and it's become a part of my lifestyle and a part of my routine. Like I'll ask it the weather. I'll ask it if it's how the subways are running. I'll ask it to play music while I'm in the shower getting ready. There's an Alexa in every single room of my apartment, including the bathroom now, which is it integrates into your lifestyle more than you realize it will. And being affiliated with that and being a part of that, at least right now, we see is incredibly important because it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as more and more companies release either their own versions of Alexa products or their own versions of smart home products. When I go to sleep, I say, Alexa, turn off my lights. And because my lights are the Hue bulbs, they just turn off. I don't have to fumble around looking for the remote that I've probably misplaced at that point. Or even open up the app on my phone, which takes 10 seconds to load. I just tell the stick that's standing on top of my dresser to do a thing, and it does something, which is incredible.
Did you ever get the Alexa laugh that everybody's been going crazy about?
No, I knock on wood, I haven't yet. I'm a little terrified of that, actually.
That would creep the shit out of me.
Yeah, especially if it's 4 a.m. You're just what the fuck is that? I'm all right, well, I'm plugging that one because gotta get a new one. That's terrifying. But it's just such a cool way to consume content. You literally can be doing one thing. You can be doing two things at once. I can be cooking, but also listening to a podcast and it's not necessarily on the forefront of what you're doing. You don't have to be paying 100% attention, but I mean, I'm sure you've had times where you're listening to something passively, but then a couple days later or a month later, you're like, oh shit, I remember it comes up in conversation oh, I just listened to this thing, and you spit out a fact that you wouldn't have known otherwise. It's fascinating that it's just a brand new way to consume.
I love the fact that it's just on the way to work, especially for myself anyways, it's a good 45-minute drive, without traffic there and back. And then with traffic in the winter, you can get maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours. It can be ridiculous in Montreal. So having that, listening to two podcasts back to back is awesome. What really got me into it was
Vince also doesn't know how to read. So you have to listen.
I hate reading. I find
that's what it's like to say.
Growing up, I never liked reading. It's just that the fact of picking up a book and being able to do other things instead was just more appealing. So audio to me is just so impressive and so interesting because I'm able to learn on the go. And NPR is how I built this. I don't know if you ever heard of that podcast or not.
I have, yeah.
So I listened a bit here and there, I listened to every single episode. I won't lie. So some of the content they spit out, and like you said, it's little tidbits, of information that's just really interesting, and that just reside with you, and you're thinking about it. And sometimes when you're in a meeting at work, it's just, I've heard this scenario before. How would we try this, guys? And the reason I'm saying this is because I learned it through here. And it's so funny how I've gotten at least, I want to say a good 15, 20, 30 people on podcasts I listen to, whether it's GaryVee, Joe Rogan, NPR, It's crazy. It's nuts. Because when you start mentioning it and saying where you got that information from, it's addictive to others as well. They want to get that too on a daily basis.
It's crazy. I mean, what's still is still blowing my mind is that podcasts have been around for a while. Podcasts have been around since the a little bit after the OG iPod, which was what, 10 years ago? It was, or more, and now it's really starting to blow up. How long ago was the iPod, the actual original iPad? I can't remember, but
I'm curious. Is it because you think the phones got better enough to house that much more data or content, or it's clear, or why?
Did people actually start focusing on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're just, we're evolving to be better multitaskers. Back when the iPod was introduced, it was, we were still we're still not used to doing more than one thing at once. We were just getting music into that. And now we can listening to somebody's voice is definitely takes more concentration, but even if it's subliminal concentration, with smartphones and with just all this stuff that you're doing at the same time, it's just growing more natural to us, I think.
Are there any specific podcasts that you like listening to? Besides your own, besides Gary Vee's podcast?
Yeah. So I inadvertently listen to pretty much every episode because I'm making it. But besides that, the really the only podcasts I listen to are car related ones. Like it's just like, it's how I get my fill of like the automotive industry. Besides reading, which I don't do a ton of anymore. Like I've just found that like I like listening to things about it better. Like I listen to The Smoking Tire, which is my favorite podcast of all time. Because of the people in the show, but also because it's just like an hour and a half of them talking. Like there's no really set format of it. Like there's not different segments. It's them talking about cars the entire time, and it's just like a very, very natural flow. So it's my favorite one by far. Along with that, Hooniverse is another one, as well as regular car reviews. Like it's all automotive stuff in my world.
Very cool.
So would you start your own podcast about cars?
I've considered it. I just like,
you know how to
I
do
don't
it,
know
right?
I don't know if I could. And I of course I'm saying this, and like in the back of my head, I'm hearing like Gary's content, just like, no, just fucking do it.
Yeah.
Like, just fucking do it because it's fun. You should do it.
Yeah.
I've considered it. I haven't yet. Would I? Probably, yeah. I would once I like sit down and like actually ideate it and like think about like what I want to talk about, or how I would talk about it. Then yeah, I would do it.
So would you
stay on the lookout for Seth's podcast or whatever to call it.
So would you actually? Do you mind going through the exact steps of how you would conceptualize it? Because I know you said ideate. Like how would you actually do it? Like if you start like, is it worth me doing? Can I go through with this? Like how would you actually determine? Because I know you spoke. It might be a bit niche, right? One of the podcasts you like a lot, where it's very specific. Like how do you determine your audience? Like how do you determine if it's worth it?
I'd start paying more attention to what I talk about in everyday life, and something that kind of flows naturally to me in conversation. Like if it's just like, for example, if it is a car podcast, like, is it just like general knowledge? Is it something super niche? Is it like I'm only doing a podcast that relates to the development of Teslas, like the development of electric cars and how they're being integrated into our society, and like interviewing people that are close to that, like whether it's somebody who is like an engineer at Tesla or worked on like the Chevy Bolts, or seeing how different people, interviewing people about their thoughts on kind of the electric car revolution. Actually, this is coming a lot quicker into my head than I thought it would. Something I'm fascinated with is like, I think that the electric cars are going to take over the world eventually. But kind of talking about what comes naturally to you. Like if you really have to force it, if you're not super into basketball, but you see an opportunity that like a basketball podcast isn't really there, I mean, you should consider it. Like if you think you can get into it, but if you don't really enjoy it, then why are you doing it anyway?
Because you're saying it's gonna catch up to you. You're gonna get fed up. You're gonna run out of content. You're not gonna be happy.
You won't be yourself, and they'll show.
Yeah, and you won't.
Like, what happens for that 1 week that you don't have a guest planned? That like, are you just gonna sit there and talk about it like with yourself? It's something that you're not interested in. Like it just doesn't sound fun.
Yeah, the authenticity is definitely off at that point. Yeah.
The one thing we've and maybe you'll have a comment on this. The one thing we find that's challenging a bit is deciding whether you're going to come up with the content yourself, meaning me and Matt could interview each other on various topics, or we can decide to bring in a third element like a guest or whatnot to talk about it from a specialty standpoint. A lot of topics that we talk about we're really interested in, but we want someone who's been actually doing it for many years, or at least trying to succeed in that scope. So that's why we bring someone as a guest. I find it to be a lot challenging than I first thought it was, in the sense that you think you'd be able to reach out to X amount of people and you'd get tons of yeses. That's not really the way it's going to turn out for you. If you're thinking of having, a guest focused podcast, is that what you would be looking to do? Something that's guest focused, or are you talking with your other gearhead buddies and kind of round tabling certain topics?
I would. I think it would be a big mixture. I think I would start out with my buddies. I would start out with people that like people that I know that have a similar interest. But then after I build up a few episodes, maybe it's actually really good, and like maybe it's gaining a little bit of traction, and then maybe a little more comfortable reaching out to like to a reporter at a popular auto blog, or somebody who also has a podcast that wants to would collaborate in that sense. So I think it would be a mixture of both. I don't think I could just do it just myself talking about it. I think I would definitely run out of things to say, and I would end up repeating myself a lot. But that said, I would still love it, and I would still love what I'm doing. I just know that it wouldn't be interesting to other people.
Yeah. Even for us, I think we'd just end up yelling at each other events the whole time.
Yeah, we tend to
bicker a lot.
Bicker a lot. One of the previous episodes, someone said, "You guys are like a married couple. What's going on here?" We loved it. I was like, "This is exactly what we want." So we have a lot of fun doing this. So that's why we keep on doing it. But you're right. If you don't have fun doing it, that's going to be terrible for you.
Yeah.
You might survive the first few weeks, first few months even, but it's going to bite you in the ass sooner.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What would you say is like the biggest no-no or biggest mistake people make when creating audio content, or maybe just content in general, because you do have the social media background as well? What's the biggest mistake?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever thought about that.
He's going to brag afterwards, by the way. He's going to brag. He said, I had one good question. Yeah.
I'm just happy you said it. Like, I was staring at him. I was actually hitting him under the table saying, he just said I had a good question.
No, that's a great freaking question. What? I think, man, I'm going to have to think about that one and come back to it, because I can't think of that off the top of my head. I mean, for social media in general, like having it just be like one giant right hook, like buy this thing. Like, I think solely promoting a product or solely promoting like the end agenda, I think it just doesn't work. Like, I wouldn't listen to a podcast for 40 minutes where every couple minutes they're relating back to like, oh, but you should buy this thing. Like, I think that's a mistake. I'm sure there's other examples that I just like can't think of off the top of my head though. Like, and that does relate back to social media. Like, if you see an ad that's like kind of organic and like lives in your feed and like just exists there naturally because it brings you value, it's an interesting video, and at the end they're like, oh, this video was made possible by blah blah blah, or like, there's a subtle hint to like you're watching something about like doing dishes, and for some reason, there's obviously product placement there.
Yeah.
But like, it's still an interesting video regardless, even though it's about doing dishes, which I don't know why that's the first thing that just came to my head.
It could be entertaining, it could be funny the way they do it or whatnot, or maybe they're pulling off an old show and they're making fun of a scene. That's exactly. I agree with you. I mean, my biggest, and maybe this will give you time to think about it too as well. My biggest thing is, you said it perfect, like monetizing too early in the game, I think, is a killer, and monetizing too often is a killer. So you're asking for that sale all the time. And then the other thing too is, I think not knowing your audience and what their needs are. At the same time, it's funny, like I find that's the biggest mistake, yet the hardest thing to like grasp correctly. Like, I find you're always kind of like grading the surface and getting a bit better at that target market, especially in the audio side. Like, there isn't much data. You can use PodTrack or other companies like you mentioned to kind of get that data.
Right.
But like, man, oh man, it's like you're just literally a millimeter at a time trying to get
right.
closer to it.
I think it'll start to hockey stick pretty soon because of how big audio is getting and how important it's becoming to brands. I think eventually you'll start seeing a lot more data around it, and like Apple probably will start integrating more analytics and more information that you can then pull and like learn more about your audience, and then you kind of know like what their likes are and what they are like listening to you for, like they already do like where your drop off is, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
But you just start to gain that insight and can start tuning yourself and tuning your show and tuning your content towards what people obviously like. I think it's just going to take time. I don't think it's going to be that much more time though, because it's just like it's blowing up.
Going back to consistency when you're talking about it, has there ever been a time where you weren't able to be consistent with the audio experience, or?
Not yet. There's been there's been like one or two times where I've scheduled an episode and somehow messed up the day.
Okay.
But I was able to remedy it pretty quick. Like I noticed that I didn't get the notification on my phone that like there's a new podcast available, and I went, oh crap, I gotta like look into this. It's something that like I looked into fast. Nothing really consistency wise that I can think of now.
Okay. Just wondering if there was any ramifications going after that, or you caught it so fast that it didn't really matter at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nah, nothing off the top of my head.
Cool.
Okay.
We usually end with a question. Vince likes to ask this question, so since you got a good question in today, I'll let you.
Yeah, we used to ask a question that's a bit of humor, a bit of like tied into what you're doing as what you're passionate about. So, I'm gonna say you've probably seen many guests and been interviewing many guests or many people in general. If you had to, and we always do our thing in threes, just so you know as well. So if you had to choose 3 people to interview today that you've encountered previously or that you haven't interviewed yet, that'd be a real interesting for you. And we'll tie it in, with your car podcast, whatever podcast you'd be creating. Who are those 3 people and why? Why would you want to interview them?
So I'll kind of mix it up of like people that we haven't interviewed and people that we have. Number one would be, I think it would be Elon Musk. Like Tesla is a company that is completely blowing my mind. And like, I think is also for many reasons, like the fact that they're making this insane piece of machinery that doesn't look like a terrible car. Like it looks amazing. And his philosophy on not only cars, but also like just transportation in general, like the Hyperloop idea, all these things that his brain is formulating around. I think he'd be a super, super, super interesting person to talk to and to interview. Somebody that we have interviewed, and again, like this isn't really me interviewing, this is Gary interviewing.
Yeah.
We had T-Pain on the Ask Gary Vee show, and that was
awesome. That was
one of the
awesome.
Yeah.
Oh,
one of my favorite episodes of all time. It was entertainment factor was a million. Like it was just great. It was such a cool episode.
But you know what also killed that one? I mean, those of you who did not, they're listening now that did not listen to that one, you really should. That girl with the cleaning company, right? The mopping.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
When I think of that episode, like I don't even think of Gary. I don't even think of T-Pain. I think of this girl, like cussing up a storm. I loved it. It was fucking ridiculous, and she was going balls to the wall on this.
Yeah.
Like literally, she knew what she was doing. Like she knew she was pure entertainment, and like she was gonna get Gary and T-Pain's attention on this. It was just ridiculous. That was ridiculous. I loved it.
It was so funny. Yeah, I was in tears after that one, just dying laughing. It was so funny.
And you hear you guys as I remember because as the audio is playing, I'm dying laughing in the car in traffic. People are looking at me like this guy's nuts for sure. And then I hear you guys laughing in the background, and Gary's like, Gary's like, I cannot believe what I'm hearing right now, which rarely happens. Nothing shocks him. This time he's shocked. You guys are all laughing in the background. I loved it. I thought it was great. And so natural, too. Like, it was just, it was perfect. It was perfect.
Yeah, I fully agree. My third one, I would say, do you know the band, the Red Hot Chili Peppers?
Yes.
Flea. So the bassist. His music, his playing, the band in general is what I attribute a lot of like where I am. Like it's the first music that I really fell in love with and that I really got into, and like it got me playing. Which then got me playing in a band, which then got me recording, which then made me decide that I wanted to go to school for music and for audio engineering. I just think that like, at least in my life, he and the rest of the band is just such a big influence. I think it would be great to like sit down and like chat and like just learn where that influence came from. Like what influenced him to get to where he is. And it's that would definitely be my third.
So cool. So cool. Have you watched the Defined ones yet?
No, I haven't.
Okay. You gotta watch that. I think you'll
It's
just the
with,
way you're talking. I think you'll enjoy it.
It's with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine, and seeing
I've-
where they started from and where they went out. Like that was, and basically kind of did beats at the end. That's how kind of it finished
Yes,
there. And the whole
yes.
idea of, you know what, we can do this, and they just pushed. It's very, very interesting story.
So there's one specific scene I sent. I think I recorded it and I sent it to you. Jimmy Iovine is he's talking about how when you want to go after something, right, and you put your blinders on, and in the background as he's talking, there's a horse race going on, and he's comparing it to racing, to horse racing. That's the reason why these horses have blinders on is because if they look a bit to the left, a bit to the right, what will happen? They'll misstep and they'll fall, and you see a big crash. And he starts yelling, saying, "Don't fucking misstep. Don't look. Just go. Go. Don't care about the guy next to you, the gal on the right. It doesn't matter. You got to do your thing, and you just got to go and look forward." Really cool scene. Highly recommend that show.
I have to. I know. I've been told by so many people I have to watch it, and I just keep forgetting and putting it off. That's my goal for this weekend is to finally watch it. To finally sit down and watch it.
Send me an email. Let me know what you think. I'm curious. It was that much of a good.
It took you a
few
month
episodes.
after I told you to watch it.
I know, but like you said, like you gotta put the time to it. But once I watched it, literally it was like I think it was 1 day or 2 nights. I watched it for 6 hours, and that was it. Like it was good. It's well worth it. Hey, thanks, Seth. Before we let you go, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, pick your brain a bit, they need help on their project, how could they reach out to you? Simple Instagram, Facebook. What do you prefer?
Instagram or Twitter. I'm at Seth. at Seth Feingersh, SethFeingersh on both platforms, same handle. Instagram and Twitter is definitely the best way. I pay more attention to Instagram and Twitter now than I do my personal account.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. And until next time, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks.